Well, thank you all for being here. I didn't know if we would have many people, if any, but I'm glad that y'all came. Just an introduction. My name is Preston Pogue. I created a podcast called The Green Hour. Gosh, I guess it was a little over a year ago. And the goal and kind of the mission behind it was to bring leaders like Michael on and talk about the really cool work that they're doing. So bringing people from the private sector, people from the public sector, nonprofit sector, to talk about sustainability and really educate the public on all these different types of things, these initiatives, because I think that there's a big gap right now in education, and that's kind of the mission behind this. So pleasure to meet you all. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Michael, and the whole Cherry Street team for putting this together. So I think I'll give an introduction to you first, Michael. So Michael Chanin, the CEO of Cherry Street Energy. I mean, we're sitting here today at the Bright Energy Forum, something that you put together. And I guess the first question I'll ask you, as we discuss the future of clean energy, can we start by defining what bright energy means for Cherry Street Energy?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to be here. And I'm glad thought leadership is a spot where we spend a lot of our time. We know that we need to continue working with stakeholders, communities, community leaders about both the necessity of what we work on and the inevitability of this process. Bright energy is sustainability in action. Bright energy is this notion that we believe it necessary for this transition to renewable power to occur, both because of the absolute reality of anthropomorphic climate change. It is critical that we address how we combust carbon and the impact that has on our environment. And as our Chief Technology Officer, Ben Damiani, says, we did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stone. There's a better technology. My team now tells me, because I did not know, I think that had to do with iron. Solar panels, this technology, is a core and critical component of this inevitable transition to incorporate renewable power. And bright energy is this idea, both bright kindness to me is so important in what we do. As we think about the critical elements, one of the key traits of our team has to be, we've got someone on our team called Daniel Uribe, and sometimes when he gets off calls, he said, that person has a very strong opinion about something they know very little about. And as we have those types of conversations, bright energy is to enthusiastically say, I hear you. Let's talk through that one more time about why this is inevitable, why this is necessary. And bright energy really embodies that spirit of what do we need to do for something to be easy? What can we do to make it economical? And how do we make it enduring? How are Cherry Street a 100-year business? And what are the steps that we would take? And bright energy is kind of that idea that we are not in the possession of truth. We're in the pursuit of it. And that if we can keep working to have these discussions and listen, have things like the Bright Energy Forum, where we have our partners that are our customers, our partners that are our prospects, partners that are our vendors, and then those stakeholders, the elected officials and otherwise that create the collection, that community that is leading this inevitable transition. Bright energy is that collective action. It is that call for everyone to come together and try to effectuate change in the communities that we serve.
Yeah, it's, in my opinion, if you're doing business and you're not profiting the people that work for you and profiting the community, it's like, what's the purpose of doing the business? And that's one thing I love about Cherry Street, the work that you do. You not only, you're bringing renewable energy to people and communities, both in the public and private sector, but you're also, enhancing stuff like workforce development. You have things like your solar school, which is just so cool because, again, I'll touch on, I think education is paramount to everything, but especially in sustainability, because there's just such a gap of knowledge. People a lot of times will see what they read on the news, they'll see what they see on social media apps on sustainability, but we need to get to a point where we actually find the truth, like you're saying. So business for good, I know this is a big kind of push for businesses to be good, but I think Cherry Street's doing a great example. And I think, that will kind of segue into looking at the clean energy future on kind of a macro level. So not just here in Atlanta or just in the state of Georgia or just in the U.S., but globally. Transitioning to a clean energy future, it's going to require cross-sector collaboration. Before we got on stage here, we listened to, I think it was the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Atlanta, and then we heard someone from the private sector. It was a great talk, and how they're talking about collaborating and really coming together to get to these goals.
And in fact, those were every chief sustainability officer in the history of the city of Atlanta was a part of that panel. Two of them electronically had some snafus, but all save for one. But that was Mandy Mahoney, who was the first and created it. She now works for the Secretary of Energy. Then Denise Quarles, who's the second, and she's the head of strategy now for Siemens. Then it's Chandra. In between Chandra, there's a woman called Stephanie Stuckey, who followed Denise. Now Stephanie runs their family business called Stuckey's. And after her was Shelby Busso. Shelby's now the Chief Resiliency Officer of City of San Diego. But that was a collection of every Chief Sustainability Officer, and then Amol Naik would be the outlier who wasn't here today, but that group of people together, that still, to your point, is the right one, coordinate and collaborate with each other to keep finding those public-private relationships that are there.
All right. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. I think we came in before they must have introduced themselves, but I didn't realize that's really cool. When we think about, again, this cross-sector collaboration, I mean, we can start off by talking about the city of Atlanta here. When they were talking on stage, we were talking about how city of Atlanta has a goal that by 2035 to be 100% clean energy. And it's interesting, Michael, because I'm actually working with them on their board, the Clean Advisory Board. I'm co-chairing their working group. So we're developing solutions in the community to try to take to get to this goal by 2035. But I say all that because, Cherry Street's partnered with the city of Atlanta, who has this goal. And can you collaborate a little bit on this project you've done with them and this collaboration?
Cherry Street really comes out of some of the work that led to that goal. In 2015, the law changed in Georgia to allow for essentially private sales of electricity. History quickly was that in the 70s, and this is true nationally, laws were passed called the Territorial Acts, which created the utility monopolies as they exist today. Generally speaking, those utilities are in the business of, certainly in the regulated market where we are, owning and operating central distribution power plants, putting poles in the ground and hanging wire. That is how our system existed really for the last 130 years. 20 years ago, first on the West Coast, some in the Northeast, people started recognizing that one of the primary inhibitors to the incorporation of renewable power were these laws. And so in 2015, House Bill 57, the Solar Power Free Market Financing Act of 2015 was passed to enable private sales of electricity. Shortly after its passage, a mutual connection and I were having lunch, and he says to me, did you know this happened? And I did not. And I went home and read the law, and you have kind of one of those life epiphany moments. It's like, I don't know how or why this happened yet, but this is incredible because a core thesis of our business, and it was something that I understood to be so at the time, and I think a lot of this thought leadership that we work on now is helping others recognize this reality. The built environment will incorporate renewable power on any structure that can support it. In California, it's already the law. By 2030, if you want a commercial building permit, it will be net zero. In Georgia, you're going to have major firms that say, we have this sustainability commitment, we need to do this thing. How? Cherry Street Energy is going to be the how. And so our first customer was my hometown of Macon, Georgia. And 5 minutes into what was the first pitch, my grandparents had a clothing store on Cherry Street, actually. It's where the business gets its name. And I was sitting with Mayor Robert Rickard. And he stops me into a pitch that's essentially, as I was telling you as we were getting kicked off. I mean, the vision has been consistent, which has been helpful in some of the entrepreneurial part of, is this going to work? Those pieces aligned, and the timing was right. And he says, Michael, let me make sure I got this right. At no cost to the city, because you're going to pay for it, you're going to save us money because your electricity less expensive than the utility, and I get to stand on the front steps of City Hall with that photo man taking my picture, telling everybody I've gone green. What am I missing? Well, fortunately, you've known me my whole life, and I'm telling you that the law changed. This is possible, and we can do this. So the first private sale of electricity in Georgia was between, or at least since the amendment of the legislation that would have been the private sale in our lifetime, would have been between us and Macon-Bibb County at the Sheriff's Investigative Center. And shortly after that announcement, I got a call from a woman named Stephanie Stuckey, who would have been the third on stage today if she didn't have to be at their manufacturing plant. And Stephanie says, I saw what you did with Macon and got announced. I wanted to be first. We worked with our lawyer and advisors, a man called Steve O'Day at a law firm, Smith, Gambrell and Russell. And she says, Steve and I worked together so that Atlanta could do these types of programs. I want to do it. And I was like, well, let's go. So our second customer was the city of Atlanta. And as Chandra mentioned, I'm not sure if you were in here, the political overlay to that. So we signed a contract with the city of Atlanta for the incorporation. The initial list was 24 buildings. We're now on, I don't know, upwards of 60 installations across the city of Atlanta's building stock. The city of Atlanta has 600 facilities. So we continue to work on building out on each of them. But we worked with the city to pass legislation to enable Cherry Street to be the renewable energy provider for the city of Atlanta on any facility that it chooses. And so that's the general nature of how Cherry Street's framework agreements work. In Georgia, they're called solar energy procurement agreements. In other markets, they're called power purchase agreements. We enter into those contracts, and generally our contracts are 20 to 30 years. We enter into that contract to sell the electricity at a predictable price over the contract tenor on all of those facilities. Now it incorporates the Department of Aviation, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the Department of Watershed Management across the wastewater treatment and water treatment facilities, departments of recreation, the fire stations, et cetera. And so the coordination with the city for that partnership, and that was in 2016. It was early 2016. And as Chandra mentions, it was coming on an election year. And so announcements of here's what we're doing and here's how we're committed to enacting these things. This was before there was a 2035 commitment. There was not a commitment at that point. It was just we need to address something we would like to do programmatically, something to incorporate renewable power. And a city council person passed legislation, and for those that would go back and check, the first goal was 2025, 100% City of Atlanta properties by 2025. Good news is Cherry Street already had the contract. The challenge, the constraint that we worked with was to say practically, we believe that we likely need more time to address that. Both we need some new technologies, and there's 600 buildings, and right now, or at that time, we were going at like 2 a month. It's like we
got skills.
So it's now a 2035 goal, which even that is aggressive. But it was just to say we should be realistic. And so you heard Chandra talk about their interim steps for what that looks like and how to achieve it. And so the city since then has worked, and we coordinate. You will hear or would have seen that we have a Shine On program, our workforce training, skilled labor, which is also part of just Bright Energy. It's this idea of collective action. We're working on something that's larger than ourselves. And we need those types of partnerships to build those other organizations and have those other relationships. And so with the city of Atlanta, for how that worked and how that partnership works, we've really been able to leverage that relationship and the leadership that all of those women that were here demonstrated, we've been able to coordinate with them. And then from Atlanta, our third customer actually was Emory University, which is around the corner from us, because a woman who was in the chief sustainability role at Emory and close with Stephanie Stuckey, also involved in the drafting of that enabling legislation, says, hey, we also have this goal. We'd like to do that. And so Emory became our third customer.
So it's interesting. The other day, gosh, I guess it was last week, we were at Cobb County International Airport. My friend who's actually sitting here in the crowd today, he's a pilot, and he took us up in a 2-seater out of Cobb County International, and we're flying. I'm trying to go to Knoxville, and we're looking down. I'd never been in a plane of this size before, and we're looking down, and I'm looking at all these buildings, and all these flat top buildings. Maybe they're shopping centers, maybe they're whatever they are, manufacturing facilities. And I looked at him and I said, all of this valuable real estate on people's roofs, on the ceiling of their buildings, they could use for renewable energy. I'm like, why don't they do this? This is just real estate that's just sitting there. Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to segue that because that was last week and something interesting.
All I see are rooftops.
Yeah.
It's when we talk about the market opportunity that exists, and I'll go back to the same thesis from a decade ago, the built environment will incorporate renewable power on every structure that can support it. Those are all inevitably going to incorporate solar. Our focus is a marketplace that is municipalities. Our customers are Atlanta and Savannah and Macon, Athens, Chatham, Fulton, universities like Emory, schools, hospital networks, corporations, Delta Airlines. You saw here today, we work across their campus, Gulfstream or Porsche Cars, North America, their headquarters by the airport. As we continue to scale, addressing the rest of that market. Now, specifically, some of the warehouse space, huge rooftops, low energy consumption because of a lot of enhancement in how we build buildings. So it is often a misnomer to think necessarily just because it is a huge rooftop that it necessarily needs a huge amount of solar. However, it is our sense that we'll continue to utilize a lot of that available space. And this is actually another partner that we had here today were our utility partners. There were some Southern Company and Georgia Power associates, colleagues that we work closely with. Because what is coming, what doesn't really exist today, and mostly for technology reasons, is the ability to connect those multiple buildings, right? And so for Cherry Street, we will go in and incorporate renewable power on a lot of those. And we're actually, the city of Nashville, we're the on-call renewable energy provider for Nashville. And so as they look to incorporate it in other spots in Tennessee as well, we will put those on. What's not, some of it's regulatory, although it is changing in how this happens, and then some is technology, is that we will incorporate solar panels on most of those rooftops, and then we'll add a battery. And so what is going to be enabled is for us to have dispatchable power. I remember the first time I was reading a research report from a bank on this marketplace and what was happening. And when they said dispatchable power, visually, I could just see ourselves sending those electrons back out, because the way that solar panels in our systems work today, which is what we call behind the meter, those electrons physically just flow first into the building. If they're not consumed, those electrons go back out onto the distribution. And it's a little bit challenging because of how the distribution system is built today to coordinate the flow of those electrons. So there's both no economic incentive, nor is there like the technology to manage the integration of all those assets. That is rapidly changing. So most of what our team works on is finding those building owners and the tenants in those buildings who have interest in incorporating renewable power. But most often our conversation with them is, we're just going to start. And let us start just with the postage stamp, which I heard the postage stamp metaphor from my dad, and then I had to think about it for a while because I put postage stamps on envelope so infrequently. But basically, it was to say, let's start with a small piece of that roof. Let us show you how this works. And in time, contractually for us, section 19.7.3 of our contract, system upgrades and improvements, and then we'll come back. And when battery technology is cost efficient for you, we'll add more solar panels. We'll put a battery in. When you incorporate EV charging, we'll come and put in the EV charging, and we'll add more solar panels and add more batteries. And that's how we think about this idea of making an easy and economical and an enduring solution, because we know that we're going to come back and continue to improve. All of those rooftops are incredible opportunity. And then it gets to some of the very specific strategic questions of how do we focus still a small and dedicated team on most efficiently adding capacity, knowing that all of those are ultimately going to be customers.
I talk about it a lot in the podcast on with sustainability. If you can bridge the economic and the environmental together and find a solution, a lot of people can't oppose that. I mean, if you make something economically friendly, that's also conserving the environment, helping the environment, in this case, solving the issue of energy, right, and emissions. If you can bridge those two together, you can find solutions, and people will back it. So I guess my next question would be, when you go to these clients, let's say that you've identified them, they have the space on, let's say, a rooftop, and you go to them and you use your postcard, your postage example. How many conversations with these clients is it around cost? Is it all about cost for the most part?
The primary stakeholder that we start with is generally in a sustainability seat. If you think through our ideal customer profile for where we spend our time right now, I would say that think of a company that has more than 500 employees, multiple facilities, and a stated sustainability goal. And if you think about Georgia and the nearly 100 now announced factories, more than half of which are factories from European, Japanese, or South Korean companies, they almost necessarily have a sustainability goal. That for us is where the conversation starts. And then the first question they have to answer is to finance. With what budget, right? You talk to a sustainability lead at a major corporation. It's like, hey, what is your budget? I remember with a major corporate customer of ours, we're sitting, it was a broad group of their team, and someone said out loud how much they spend on the apiary. They've got like these bees on campus that make some honey that they give to employees. I don't know, it's like $30,000 or something for the apiary, which was a lot. It was like a third of the budget for what they thought they might have was committed, which was a good program, but it's to say it is a multi-billion-dollar company that's allocated tens of thousands of dollars to sustainability, and a lot of it's committed to worthy things. But when you then say, hey, we would like to incorporate millions of dollars of renewable power infrastructure onto your campus, there's no chance that they're going to have capital expense willingness for that. And so the value proposition that we offer is not only is there no capital expense, but we have a predictably priced offering that they're already paying for that is less expensive than the operating cost. And so for that reason, we spend a lot of time with our customers on here is what our price of electricity is going to be, here's how it is predictable, and here is how it relates to what you otherwise would pay your incumbent utility provider. Cost most often, or at least the reliability of that cost, is where we spend a lot of time and build trust. And one other piece that I would say to this, especially talking about thought leadership and where we go and helping the market, I'm sorry for flipping the script on asking you a question. Do you know what you pay per kilowatt hour for your electricity? Of those that aren't on Cherry Street's team, know what you pay per kilowatt hour unit cost. It is typically unknown, even to the person at major corporations, individuals who have title like utility or energy manager. When you get into the kilowatt hour cost, it's complicated. it was reflected to me once from someone in a leadership role at the utility. If you are a monopoly and sell something to someone and they have no choice, you have a vested interest in it being complicated. Rates and how rates are structured has a potential to be very complicated. And this is why we go back to being easy. We want things to be simple as sunshine. We hoped that we could disentangle that. Georgia, for example, and Georgia Power in particular, has 63 commercial rates of electricity. And that's important. There are a lot of different ways that individuals consume electricity. We believe not only that it needs to be sustainable, but energy is a right. And we believe that as a society implicitly. So it's why we created the monopolies, like having equitable access to power. You mentioned you moved different parts of Kentucky. You've lived in Georgia. Each time you moved to a new town and you just called and they turned on your electricity. It's like they didn't run a credit check on you to say like, hey, can you receive this electricity? We'll just sell it to you if you use it. And that's part of the relationship that exists with utilities and the stakeholders because they have to provide it and everyone should receive equitable and equal access. Thereby, we have a lot of different rates. No one knows what they pay. It's complicated to calculate it. And helping establish that for finance teams to understand then the value proposition, to get on the right rate, have a predictable rate from renewable power is some of where we spend a lot of time in that relationship with our customers. When we work through those conversations, a future state will be one in which we can help our customers receive. Right now, our customers receive 2 bills. There will be a point in time when customers, again, receive 1 bill for electricity, and it is controlled in a way. But that's a lot of your core question is, how do we go through and work on this? And most often, every sale that we have made incorporates what is the value proposition, i.e., what are you saving us for this transition to this new technology?
Kind of pivoting off of that, and then because we've been talking about the public sector a lot, but if we look at the private sector, one of the things that I do in my everyday job is looking at ESG reports, analyzing ESG reports, seeing how my company aligns with them, if they're one of our clients or whatever it is. And in almost every ESG report I see, it's we have committed to be net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050. We're going to be carbon neutral by these years. And I was actually reading through one of your clients, Delta Airlines ESG report or sustainability report. And, they have a goal that by 2035, there'll be 100% renewable energy. And y'all actually just did a project with them. And I think that I forget exactly how much energy they purchase, but this is really going to affect their Scope 2 emissions and really drive the Scope 2 emissions down. So the question I'd ask you is, when looking at the private sector, how important, are these goals? Obviously, they're hugely important. But how important are these goals for these companies to really start investing in things like renewable energy for their general operations?
Yeah, so increasingly, I think it's becoming the lever that is motivating companies to act. I mean, no longer, right? Especially public companies, to disclose we're going to have this goal. There is an entire segment of environmental stakeholders that hold public companies accountable to public statements and public financial filings. When they say this, then the follow-up question is where and how. And Cherry Street Energy can be the how. And Delta's commitment, which is a wonderful one for them to have, and we look forward to supporting them in achieving it, is a lot about ground operations. Obviously, their ground operations and that 100% commitment is really fractional in their overall consumption because of jet fuel. And so they are also leading, and there's a business actually met yesterday that's opening a factory in Georgia for sustainable aviation fuel from ethanol rather than from dinosaur bones. And those transitions, those new technologies are going to be critical for those other elements of it. I'd say the same is generally true. We work closely with the Norfolk Southern team, also on their ground operations because of some of the challenges, although they work hard on it. for how they transition all of the rest of the pieces. So, like you, our team looks closely at those sustainability goals and then helps our customers to meet them. Scope 2 emissions are going to be a piece. And the other part, right, is that just the absolute reality of anthropomorphic climate change means that we're going to have risk assessment. And my background was in banking, so I'm more familiar with their vernacular and how they think about those risk assessments. And there's going to be cost associated with that. And one way that those costs flow through are the major rating agencies who look at firms are going to change their credit rating, thereby their cost of capital, the cost of operations for them to do business and to grow is going to be impacted based off of whether or not they engage with these plans and start working through that inevitable transition.
Yeah, I would say a lot of companies, when going towards net zero, carbon neutral, these big commitments. I mean, a lot of companies are in line with stuff like the Paris Agreement. Maybe they've signed on to the climate pledge, Amazon's pledge, that by 2040, you'll be net zero. But, a lot of companies are relying on carbon offsets to do this. But I think at the end of the day, if you can look at, what you're doing in-house, figure out how to drive down your footprint as much as possible, investing in something like renewable for your operations like Delta's doing, it can really make the difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. And ultimately, and you're closer to this than I am, but my sense is, because since the beginning, the view was, and the sustainability, environmentalism is important. It matters. It's a primary driver in a lot of the decision-making that influence our customers' decision, their buying decision. It is not the reason that I started a power company. To start a power company was to say this transition is inevitable. This gets back to, we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stone. This is a better technology. If you were going to start over, the way to build the system would not be with huge central distribution power plants. You would like to have a lot of distributed technology to provide it in the places based off of what that consumption looks like. And now we're adjusting the system basically for the reality of how we need to distribute it. And so that inevitability is where we spend a lot of our time. The investment that we think companies made initially in buying renewable energy certificates or credits or carbon offsets are noble. It really helped jumpstart a lot of the investment in the technology and the innovation. My pragmatic bias is that in the market is moving this way too. A company operating in South Georgia purchasing wind credits from Oklahoma is not what the sustainability community calls scientific reduction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these are, we now look for science-based targets is, I think, the nomenclature as it's going, or you see popping up more and more, which is basically to say, was there really additionality? Did you incorporate this at the location that you used it, and is that the right way to build it? And so for us, we think there's an increasing need to help companies incorporate it where they're using it and get the benefit for the renewable energy at that location. And so we participate in some of those markets, but it's not really a focus of our business, because the focus of our business is a power company that sells electricity. Our electricity happens to be renewable and sustainable, and thereby have these credits attached or associated. But most of the focus of why do we do what we do is because we think this technology is a better technology to help power our communities.
So on that last note, when powering our communities, I mean, carbon offsets, to me, if some companies will emit X amount of carbon in, let's say, Texas, and then they'll buy an offset, let's say, overseas. And by doing that, they can offset and they can get to net zero. For me, it's all about looking at things like energy equity, figuring out not only are you helping a company get to their net zero goals or whatever goals they have, but if you can affect the communities and look at things like energy equity, I think that's really the dimension that you want to go towards. Incorporating the social element of, let's say, ESG and bringing it together. And I know that y'all do a great job of that as well.
Thank you for saying so. I would even say something that just feels like it's throwing shade, but I'll say it. Oftentimes, you can like buy a star. I feel like sometimes Recs are like buying a star. it's nice, but it's not equity, right? I mean, it's not driving inclusion. Now, there are some. There's a woman in town who runs a program, and she is working hard to align RECs with equity, and I think they're really interesting ways of doing that. It's more complicated and it takes more stakeholders, but I do think that there are ways of utilizing RECs to impact that aren't, to your point, just like buying it somewhere else so that you can fill out the report and say that you did it the right way. What we did for incorporating that equity was we called in our Shine On program a reimagined renewable energy economy to help make our core. You have large corporations that have these corporate social responsibility programs, but oftentimes, like if you looked at the corporate flow chart of what like a CSR program, I always feel like it's like, hey, this is our CSR program over here, and then this is like the core of what our business does. We wanted our corporate social responsibility to be the primary flow of what our business was, right? I mean, our mission is to do good and do well. And if you can answer yes to both of those every time, then you're probably going to be all right. Working on something larger than ourselves. And from a capital perspective, this investment in this inevitable transition is going to be the largest investment in a single asset class in human history. And so as we think about the investment in that transition, for us, it was, can we bring others, give them capital access to get involved in this marketplace that otherwise would not have had access to be included. And so in doing so, we've helped, or we work with partners like Abaduni Martin to say, hey, I'm a hard worker, I'm knowledgeable, I'm capable. And it's like, all right, well, that's great. And we've got a problem that we need help solving. Namely, we've got more projects to build than we've got people to build them. We need people who are good leaders who can build businesses and do so. And if RECs come with it, or, all of the other stuff, that's fine. But like, we would rather say that, our programs are going to be much more about who are the communities that we impact, who are the individuals that we can engage and involve in the work that we do. Almost explicitly, the goal was not, can we stroke a check, or can that corporation stroke a check to then like say they have done that thing. It really wasn't action in the way that we wanted to activate.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't just be about checking a box and then just moving on with it. And I think we talked about offsets a lot, but a lot of offsets, it is about checking the box, moving on with it. But if you do things the right way with RECs, as you're saying, you can affect the communities positively. Yeah. You can provide energy with these RECs in areas that need it the most. But kind of transitioning from that whole lens and that conversation, and then looking more at policy. I know right now, under the Biden-Harris administration, I think it's the largest investment in green type technology in our history. You look at policies like the IRA, IIJA, these policies are pushing a lot of funding to renewable energy projects. I grew up in Dalton, Georgia. I work in Calhoun, Georgia now, in the flooring industry, but in Dalton, Georgia, you had a South Korean company, Q-Cells, open up the first factory in the U.S., which is so cool. But I say all that because I just want to ask you, with what Cherry Street does, how much does policy play a role in y'all's business?
Critically, in as much, right? Like our inception story, the genesis came out of policy change, right? So House Bill 57, the Solar Power Free Market Financing Act of 2015, amended the Territorial Act, which was passed in the 70s, to allow for us to operate, right? So it certainly was an enabling element of us getting started, and it continues to be that energy markets are highly regulated. So that there is regulation is just a reality. And a lot of this has to do with the equitable access to electricity that we view as a right. And so those types of things require responsibility for reliability. And ultimately, I would say, like, you see markets that are much less regulated than Georgia that are also not perfect in a lot of ways. And so this is not me to say that like regulation is bad. Policy just becomes a critical element because, to to avoid the tragedy to the commons. We need to take care of, is this done responsibly in a way that is enduring, economic, and is it easy for people to adopt and not get priced out? I mean, the challenge that we face is that a lot of people then would not have access because the price of electricity could get so high. And so we focus on policy solutions to make sure that the marketplace continues to be free and open, and that people can have equitable access to affordable electricity. And generally, that message carries. Our business works very hard to be as apolitical as possible because we service all, and that all of our customers, state governments, municipal governments, corporations, have all sorts of different views, but all of them view as there's this base aspect of a civilized society. Is that? I mean, it is a book called Energy and Civilization, and basically you can go back to when we were coming out of the cave and burning fuel from firewood the first time. Like, if you look at global GDP growth and global energy growth up until about a decade ago, they moved in conjunction with each other. Now, that changed slightly in the last decade because of the shift to renewables. So like the fuel was from the sun and you measure it differently, but basically those two outputs have been concurrent for the last 300 years. And I mean, really longer, but tracked in recorded history for hundreds of years now, GDP growth and the growth of electricity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to remember the graph. I'm working with the intern at my company on basically it's a product circularity education unit. So like a big slide deck. And we're looking at really, one of the graphics was on carbon emission growth and temperature growth over time, and reading it from, I think, from the beginning of the 1880s, which is when the Industrial Revolution was, and seeing how it's changed. And the interesting thing is, as carbon emissions go up, as the graph is showing, so do temperatures. So that's interesting little side note. But
have you shortcutted with him or her, the intern, to well, perhaps they would know, but the film that Al Gore did called An Inconvenient Truth is overwhelmingly worth watching. And he has a quite notable scene in the film that shows that precise chart. And then he dramatically shows as the chart goes, he ultimately has to get on a scissor lift to be able to point to where it goes, and basically the last 50 years.
Wow.
In the amount of carbon that we've consumed to generate and accelerate the growth that we're having globally has been from that. But it's also because that absolute reality of anthropomorphic climate change, what it means and what it's done to the world. Another anecdote that's pretty new to me to exhibit the reality of what that's looked like. We will run out of petroleum for vehicles with regular consumption, and this is regular way petroleum, and these are numbers from like Shell's public filings, 2070. So, in 150 years, we've consumed like 1 million years worth of dinosaur bone, which is just incredible to think about in a number of different ways. Natural gas, by the way, we would run out of in like 80 to 100 years. And so those are really finite periods of time that we have to transition from, because these fuels are finite. And so hold aside like the devastation that some of the consumption caused to the atmosphere, the other just overwhelming reality is that we have to find ways of transitioning off of them, both because of what rising temperatures mean and all of the other elements, and because we don't have it. And we believe that a developed society needs to have ready access to most people. I mean, certainly us, you flip the switch and you assume the lights are going to go on, and that's not guaranteed. And so when one thinks about that, or kind of recognizes that in the state of Georgia, and we should be able to meet the demand, but today we know that we need to double the generation capacity in the state. They're 20,000 or thereabout megawatts of generating capacity, 20,000 megawatts in Georgia. It took us about 100 years, to your point. It's like 1880, we really weren't building central distribution power plants. It took another 30 or 40 to do so. In the last 100 years, we've built 20,000 megawatts. We need to build that same amount in the next 10 to meet existing demand that's coming to Georgia. The South Korean plants that you're talking about, or all of the others. And so doing that in a way that utilizes resources in a way that are going to be available for decades to come requires this transition. At first, when we started, I think it was viewed antagonistically by us, and it really wasn't intended as such, but this is an inevitable and necessary transition just because of the level setting. What are the details of those facts?
Yeah, it's it can be kind of scary. Through this research we were doing with the intern, we're looking at population projections. We're looking at how resources are going to become finite over time. And I wrote this down. I hope this is the right statistic, but I think the stat was by 2050, some are projecting that population will grow to 10 billion people. I think it's something like that. So as you think about population growth, what do people need? They're going to need more energy as well. And if we don't find clean, renewable forms of energy, we're going to, it's like a whole cycle. It's all systems thinking is what it comes down to. If you have higher population, you need more energy use. If you don't have renewable solutions, you're going to start emitting more carbon in the atmosphere. And then global temperatures are going to rise. And then it's just a whole it's crazy to think about it when looking in that kind of system. But yeah.
Totally. I mean, I'm an optimist that suggests that I hope ingenuity, innovation, collaboration allows us to stem a lot of the outcomes that, the challenges that we're going to confront suggest are out there, but it's absolutely the case. And as you look at what those things, an anecdote that I share often with people now is, 6 or 8 months ago now, I got to tour a 600-acre data center using the energy unit measure again. It's a 1,000 megawatt large language model. It's an AI data center. The nuclear power plant that was just turned on, Vogtle Unit 4, 1,000 megawatts. One large language data center equals one nuclear reactor. So as we think about and this is why I say, and remember, Georgia is 20,000 megawatts, a data center is one. And we've got dozens of them coming to the market. We know we've already attracted them here. They're coming, they're building, they're under construction. There are thousands of megawatts of needed capacity that we have to get to the system to have that reliability. And by the way, those two nuclear plants that were just constructed cost $36 billion. Which is a lot. And then that goes into the rate base and that goes into the electricity. You're also going to have the electrification of the auto fleet. That's also inevitable because we're going to run out of, there's a decent bit of perhaps noise or at least reporting of EV sales going down because we don't have the infrastructure and for probably pretty rational consumer behavior. There's a reason that every major auto manufacturer is coming out and transitioning to an EV fleet. And candidly, my sense is it is not purely because of the impact of climate change that you're researching. It's because they're not going to have fuel in 30 years reliably for everybody. And they need some other way to make sure that they've built huge 100-year businesses, that they've got another 100 years. They've got to have technologies that can operate in a system that is not reliant on something that is perishable.
To your point on EVs, sales going down, I invested in a company, I think it was called Workhorse, early on, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. But as you see, I saw a graphic the other day that a lot of these EV companies, looking at their stocks, they have plummeted. They continue to plummet. And it's like Tesla's figured it out. I've done a lot of research in this, so I won't talk about it, but it is interesting to figure out, because I know states like California, they've got goals to go 100% EVs by X year. But how are we going to get there? That's the whole thing. Yeah. So we started off this conversation talking about education and how education is paramount to, driving a clean energy future, driving sustainability. And one of my favorite things that Cherry Street does is around education. I mean, even here today, you set up this forum and brought people from the community in to learn about the public sector, what they're doing, what the private sector is doing. But at your new campus that you just unveiled, you have what is called the Solar School. And I'm interested. I haven't done any research on this, but I've seen the graphics of it. What is this Solar School, and what kinds of people are you bringing in to educate, and what's kind of the goal around this?
Yeah, of course. So Solar School, it gets back to our idea of this reimagined renewable energy economy. Specifically, Solar School is about training the skilled workforce necessary to help us lead this inevitable transition to renewable power. Oftentimes, these are careers that we work to create, and we'll say from blue collar to new collar. And this is because one of the critical elements we have to solve to accelerate the adoption of renewable power is how to build it. Anecdote I shared earlier today is one of our first investors. He's a board member, continues to be, and has been a wonderful mentor of mine. Is a gentleman called David Radcliffe. In his prior role, he was the chairman and chief executive of the Southern Company, the regional utility in our market. And he had run Georgia Power a couple times before that, and actually Mississippi Power before that. And in my first meeting with him at the end, in addition to saying, fortunately, that he was interested in investing, was, the biggest issue I see for you with your business model, no cost, save money, go green. Can you string them as fast as I can catch them? I didn't fish at the time, nor really now, but I have a much deeper appreciation of what stringing means in fishing. And it's, you can sell someone on your value proposition. Can you build it? And then can you build it the right way? And can you build it in a way that lasts for decades to come, aligning all the right incentives? Because remember, we only get compensated if our system is producing power. So we care a lot about how that is installed. And, in some of the early projects that I worked on, the labor that was brought to work on the project was woefully uninformed about what they were doing, how they were doing it, the right way to do it. And it's you go up to a job site and, a solar panel is just a piece of glass. You see people walking all over it, or a couple of guys had stacked a couple of them together to make a picnic table and benches out of the solar panels and the bricks that we had out there, which is not the right use. And so, people have a vested interest in making things seem more complicated than they are. The installation is not necessarily complicated, but it requires a rigorous attention to detail. And it's in our interest to make sure that everyone we work with knows what they're working on, knows why they're working on it, knows how they can have a role in this broader ecosystem. And, early on, I was meeting with a woman, Dr. Barbara Wall is her name, who heads up the Career Technical and Agricultural Educational Program in Georgia, CTAE, which is vocational training programs in Georgia. And I was saying, we need to have a solar capable technician in all 159 counties. I mean, every school that has, some type of a CTAE program, there's 17 tracks in the CTAE program today, and, framing, plumbing, drywall, even some electrical. It's like, everyone is going to need this. And it's like, well, if everyone needs a plumber, then yeah, because again, the thesis, built environments can incorporate renewable power on every structure that can support it. Every one of these communities has to have these capabilities. And today we're not even close. And not only that, there's not a curriculum to do so, this thought leadership. And so we are working, and actually our partner, Dooney Martin, is making 30-second to 1-minute videos for some of these training programs, so that as someone get out in the field and you say, hey, what's the right way to string this? Or is this wire management appropriate? Or how do I think about those steps? So Solar School is really just our kind of authentic desire to help train the skilled labor force necessary for this transition. And there are a number of nonprofits that work on this, but we felt that it was part of our responsibility to try to include both our perspective and what that should look like, and then share the knowledge that we have. I mean, there is not a readily accessible manual. If you said, I'd like to go install a commercial solar installation at a carpet manufacturing warehouse, you might get a manual from a solar panel manufacturer, or another key component we use is the inverter. The inverter takes the direct current electricity from a solar panel and goes to the alternating current that we use in most of our facilities. There's not something that says, here's how to take the solar panel, connect it to the inverter, wire it through into the main distribution panel, and here's the best way to piece those things together. You could read the separate manuals for all of those components, or maybe hire an electrician that says, like, I've pulled that wire. But as you think about the comprehensive systems, and then overlay now incorporation of battery storage, the integration of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, those pieces are really what we do in solar school. You gotta come check it out to see where those are. And also, I mean, for us, I mean, our solar school is there. We will teach training classes out of it. Another one in August with actually two nonprofits, a foundation, and then City of Refuge also will do a training class with us to help give access to these types of careers, and then hopefully to be able to replicate those, or take the curriculum out of solar school and take it to other places and firms that would do so. Because some of the research that we've done with some support from Emory and a team at Georgia Tech, for every roughly 4 recreation centers that we work on, 4 average size installations for us, it represents 25 careers. And these are long-term careers, right? It's not like a gig, someone that got picked up for a day labor. Every 4 recreation centers, which is roughly 1 megawatt, that represents 25 careers in renewable power.
So I think starting when you talk about CTAE, I'm very familiar because I went to North Murray High School, which is in Chatsworth. I went through the CTAE program. I was in marketing, or like business pathway. And it unfortunately got cut because not enough people were in it. But, you know, at our school, culinary was a big thing. Ag was a big thing. Law and safety was a big thing. But yeah, I mean, at North Murray, at my high school, I mean, 90% of our students are on free lunch. It's a very impoverished area. And if you could give kids that are going to school a skill that they can take, like solar installation, and take right out of school, and then create a career out of that. I mean, that would be such a great solution. And I hope at some point it does happen with CTAE. But just give my high school as an example, because it could be a great thing for the area and for the kids and everything.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
we really hope so. And so we continue to try to have dialogues and discussions and podcasts to surface the reality of that. Just walked out as somebody on our team. I went Sunday morning and we did a Sunday school class at Central Presbyterian Church across from the state capitol. The exact same thing. And 2 people, I mean, Central Presbyterian does a wonderful job of promoting and driving inclusivity. And 2 people that were in the class came up. One was a teacher, one had just moved to town. The teacher was in the CTAE program and said, can I call you to bring this into my school? I've got folks I want to put into one of your classes that this would be perfect for. And so I think, you know, it would be the continued outreach for those things that we think that we've got an opportunity.
That'd be awesome. Well, I think everyone can agree, the audience that'll hear this, the people in the room, renewable energy is the future. It's now, it's the present, it's the future, it's needed. And I just thank you for, you know, talking about it, educating me, educating everyone in here about solar and renewable and how we can kind of move forward. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.